Hello. Ooh, that blew my hair back, didn't it? How about yours? Can we turn the mic down just a smidge? That'd be great. I mean, I know I project, but welcome everybody. How are you doing? How are you doing? Oh, use your words. Yay. It's the Lit House after all. For those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. James Hall. I'm the director of the Rose O'Neill Literary House. And I am pleased to welcome you here for this reading by Michael Dumanis, who I've known for since 2001, um, for a long time. But I have lots of friends. I just want you to know I have a lot of friends. Some are maybe watching on the live stream right now. And they're not here because I don't invite them here. They have to. It's the students who call the person that we that we invite here. And so I feel like you all will really like Michael's poems. They are crackling and alive. Who needs nature? The speaker of Michael Dumanis' poem East Liverpool, Ohio, writes in the margin of a holy book in the poem, when the power plants are beautiful. It's so amazing what we get to see. Dumanis writes a few lines later. The ruins extend across the valleys toward each sea. And I love that sea becomes sea in the poem, right? That the who needs nature when sight becomes nature anyway. Dumanis' first book, My Soviet Union, was also peopled with intense speakers who were moved to speak certainly about the kind of uncertain world they'd witnessed. About the book, which won the prestigious Juniper Prize for Poetry, the Boston Review says that Dumanis' deft use of persona, dictions, and poetic styles are able to, quote, test the capacity of linguistic inventiveness to contend with the facts of capital H history. Indeed, it's not just a contention with history, but a coping of the capital H horrors that Dumanis' poetry helps us do. I think about this poem from My Soviet Union, named after a terrific line from a Donald Barthelme story called The School. Anyone read The School in here? One person and the people on the porch. Well done. It's a great canonical short story. And it's voiced by youngsters, just like, well, it's voiced by a teacher, but the youngsters say the title poem, the title that Dumanis takes as the poem. Here's Dumanis' poem lines spoken by youngsters. Imagine our relief, our disappointment when someone told us the grenade we had discovered, the grenade we took delight in kicking to each other was just a clump of night, or else some earth, or just a heart, or else some lesser organ. Dumanis' poems are filled with those lesser organs, sure, but also with heart. That the children in the poem we require an assertion of value, we are afraid, are relieved and disappointed that they haven't been playing kickball with an actual grenade is horrifyingly human. We'd love to imagine the instruments of war on a smaller scale as some lesser organ of human history making. Dumanis has said in an interview, I think the knowledge that I am a mortal creature surrounded by other creatures, human and otherwise, offers a kind of certainty for me that few other things do. Michael Dumanis was born in the former Soviet Union and lived there until his parents were granted political asylum in the United States. He holds a BA from Johns Hopkins, an MFA from the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, and a PhD from the University of Houston. He's the author of 2 poetry collections, My Soviet Union and Creature, just published by Four Way Books, and named as a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. We have copies for sale in the other room after the reading. Dumanis is also the co-editor of the anthology Legitimate Dangers, American Poets of the New Century, and the co-editor of a book on the poet Russell Atkins. He is the recipient of the Lyric Poetry Award from the Poetry Society of America. I can already tell he's like, get through my bio. He's twisting and turning. It's so uncomfortable. But you know, when do you get to hear the amazing shit you've done, right? Like all of your days. So good. All right. I'm almost done. So he's the recipient of the Lyric Poetry Award from the Poetry Society of America. He lives in Vermont, where he is a member of the literature faculty at Bennington College, runs the Poetry at Bennington reading series, and serves as editor of Bennington Review, which under his editorship received the 2022 Whiting Literary Magazine Award. It's like $30,000. He won that magazine. You will never understand, try as you might, a person other than yourself controlling an altogether different set of limbs, the speaker in The Several Words I Have says. And yet Dumanis's poems urge us to try, to let go of failure, to try again. His poems are living roadmaps forward into a future where we are able to learn a larger empathy for each mortal other. Please join me in welcoming Michael Dumanis to Washington College.
I have known James for 25 years, right? Wow. I love him more and more time. It's a real delight to be here in this beautiful building. We're very lucky to have this. It's a literary house, and I've been to Chestertown a couple times before. It's just a really nice place. So I'm going to read mainly poems from my book, and time permitting, I'm going to read a couple new poems. And so this book, Creature, as James said in their terrific introduction, thank you, very flattering introduction, is really preoccupied with this question of what does it mean to understand that you are a creature in a world surrounded by other creatures, and what are those interactions like exactly, and what is really at the heart of that recognition. And I think a lot of these poems are really animated just by that central question, regardless of who the speaker may be. Years ago, there was an anthology that actually came out of Washington College, out of the Literary House Press. It was a book of poems about perfume, right? And, you get these emails asking you to do things. I got this email that I thought was actually very strange at first, saying, we would like 100 poets to write poems about perfume. Would you like to write a poem about perfume? And I thought, I don't know anything about perfume. I don't like perfume. So no, right? And then I noticed the next paragraph, which said, we will send you a vial of perfume selected for you. And we would like you to sniff this vial. And then based on the smell and the sensation of the olfactory sensation of this all happened at Washington College. All right. We will ask you to write a poem about that specific perfume. And I thought, I'd like someone to send me this weird tube in the mail. Sure. So this is the poem that came out of that project. Clouds. Because I was afraid of death, I hid my body in a cloud of vetiver and citron notes and thought I could persist forever as something burdening the air of any room I had to leave. I carved my name into a tree, forgetting that the tree would fall. Crossing the canvas as my paint peeled off me, I hollered music out of my small teeth. I thought I would outlast the weather. Here is one room I had to leave. Those are my diamond dust shoes in the corner. I am a dark shape on a video monitor. So I live in Bennington, Vermont, but some time ago I spent a lot of time in Cleveland, Ohio, and where I used to teach. And I was really miserable and lonely in Cleveland, believe it or not. I was really lonely in Cleveland, Ohio. And at one point in Cleveland, I was on a date with someone where the only real thing I knew about them is that they were a puppeteer. And about 5 minutes into the date, it was a very awkward conversation the way the date started. And I said, so what are your puppets like? And she said, they're fully posable leather and clay creatures. One of them is an elephant wearing a fez. Natural history. I'm fully posable, a leather and clay creature with the capacity to waltz and do the twist. My jaws unclench themselves. My eyes swing open. The world is young, and I still have some years, so I take out a patent on slow-moving fog. take out a patent on the hyacinth. I brand the cow, trademark the coelacanth. Its tiny heart is shaped like a straight tube. However, the darkness keeps hitting me over the head with its hammer. I want to feel more substantial than an elephant wearing a fez. So I invent the theory of gravity. So I discover my larynx and use it. So I study yoga and learn how to wrap my legs around my neck, but I keep finding occasion to lie on the floor like a slug or weep into the rented furniture. So I invent the Bhagavad Gita. So I invent the Gutenberg Bible. So I invent the Etch-a-Sketch and draw myself a lover with the right proportions. We go on holiday and sit in traffic. I do my best not to erase her, not to shake things up. When we get lonely, we invent the baby, a fully posable leather and clay creature. It cries like a small bird. We pose with it. To never erase you, I carve your initials, my lover, into the spine of a tree. You are happy, but the tree dies. So I take out a patent on the synthetic tree, and I carve your initials, my lover, into its torso, and take you to the disco and the roller derby, to the waterfall beside the paper mill. It's so amazing what we get to see. The ruins extend across the valleys toward each sea. I remember that in third grade, I had to, everyone in my third grade class had to do a project on marsupials. So you suddenly learn all the marsupials, right? And you have to, at the time, you had to call a research librarian of the public library because, this was the 80s, and ask them for information about the wombat. My animal was the wombat. And you think after that, like, I know all the marsupials, but really there are more marsupials, and you learn of them through your life. And a couple years ago, I discovered a new one, the greater bilby. Greater bilby. This article only concerns itself with greater bilbies, the extant species of bilby. For the extinct species of bilby, see lesser bilby. How many people have seen a bilby or know what a bilby is? Unlike other bandicoots, I make an excellent burrower. This blue-gray fur with patches of tan feels soft like a receding childhood in the dimming thought of a lonely traveler. My sense of smell is better than yours as I hurtle along the barrens like a tiny rocking horse. My fluted, hairless ears are the slenderest oyster shells. I, like you, harbor unrequited romantic feelings for God, prefer the comfort of a nightfall to the hot glare of anything. Perhaps we must develop a new appreciation. Fewer greater bilbies than pygmy elephants soak up the fraying, fragrant atmosphere than Ganges river dolphins. Once, bilbies skittered through Adelaide gleefully. Pin the whatever on the whatever. The pages of this encyclopedia I clamber through wear thin. Soon I may see in the dust my little cousin again. For the time being, I presume a future, and scratching for a termite the hard soil around the bunch grass, unhinge my small jaw, proffer my endless tongue. All right, so the only thing I should tell you about this next poem is that it may not seem as autobiographical as it actually is. It's fairly autobiographical, though I used to deny it. Autobiography. Attempted avoiding abysses, assorted abrasions and apertures, abscesses. At adolescence, acted absurd, acid, amphetamines. Amorously aching after an arguably arbitrary Abigail authored an awful obad. Am always arabesquing after Abigails. Am always afraid, an affliction. Animals augur an avalanche. Animals apprehend abattoirs. Am as an animal anxious. Appendages always aflutter. Am an amazing accident, alive. Attired as an apprentice aerialist, addressed acrophobic audiences. Aspiring as an adult after applause, attracted an angelic acolyte. After an affirming affair, an abortion. After an asinine affair, a vowed agnostic approached alone on Abby's altarpiece, asking alleged almighty about afterlife. ambled adagio around an arena, admired an ancient aqueduct, ate aspic, adored and ate assorted animals, ascended an Alp, affected an accent, acquired an accountant, an abacus, assets, attempted atonal arpeggios. So, like many of us, when during the COVID pandemic or the beginnings of the COVID pandemic, I spent a lot of time just sitting in a house looking out the window, and time stopped, and this poem very much came out of that space. The whereabouts. Is there a home, such a place to encircle the ears, to restrain the meandering children, keep the sky from one's shoulders, police off one's skin? Falsetto on the vinyl, always scratching one song. I adapt to whichever enclosure will help me pretend I have won at this life with its muttering furnace, bay window of hills turning crimson at fall. Lock inside a damp crawl space, each foxtrot of thought, while drowsy children stumble through the yard in their flammable wool, while lightning children flash across the fields. But once the intimacies go dark and each room shares a smell, once the many-legged bugs crowd the wavering bulb, is there still such a spot? Is there a hope, such a thought? How small a home in the context of space? How small the fat earth in the ocean of stars? How small is a poet? How narrow each word? The sky fills with words as the ice sheet gives way. How insignificant wood smoke? Eternity schemes. The glimmering prospect of giving some hope kept put the dead priest when the soldiers drew close. I will orbit each floor on which I am permitted to the vinyl's false drone. I will think myself home, as permanent now as my waving neighbor, feeling as rich as the loam. No everlasting thing must disappear. A day the wind will win over the wall. Endangered like a soap bubble, as handsome as a cockatoo, I grow attached to the distressed mauve carpet. I live here, breathe this, wake into each dawn, keep silvering in spite of everything, sun squalling through the blinds. Yeah. All right, sorry to be so morose, but I will continue to be. I don't know another way. As James said in their lovely introduction, I was born in the former Soviet Union. I came to the United States when I was 5 years old. And after about a year in Boston, we moved to Buffalo, New York. I don't know if anybody here has been to Buffalo. It's a town it's a city that was quite large 70 years ago, then a little bit less large 60 years ago, 50 years ago. And by the time I got there in the early 1980s, industry was leaving it really rapidly. And I have this vivid memory. I'd be sitting in class in third grade one week, and there'd be like 23 students in the class. And the next week, there'd be 21 students in the class because 2 students left because their parents were laid off. And this like kept happening in the very early 80s in Buffalo, New York. And this is also, a time that was known as the Cold War, which is just a time of escalating hostilities permanent hostilities between the United States and the Soviet Union. So it was easy to be like the scapegoat because like I am the enemy. I'm from the USSR, right? And children were very aware that I was from somewhere else. Flag Day. The flags flew in the wind and I saluted. We'd just moved out, my family, the lot of us, from one country into another. I failed to understand the consequence. The flags clapped like the wind. I spent each yellow bus ride attempting to count toward infinity. My fellow children told me I was weird and couldn't speak their language skillfully enough for freeze tag. I replied, "You're welcome," meaning please. Dear freckle-dotted, bowl-haired adversaries who chased me merrily in tartan vests around the shrubbery, chanting, "USSR, go home," in dissonant harmony. Where did you move, the lot of you? Each Flag Day, single file, We strutted through the playground with French horns and out-of-tune clarinets, some holding poles aslant like knights with spears, others saluting. Nostalgia is a pathological sickness. Photographed, I am as quiet as an apple approaching the mouth. In the pavilion of din, my skull stays a silence. The customs agent palmed the wedding ring my mother had neglected to declare, unfastened one gold Leo from a chain around her throat, and called it contraband. My mother clasped the thin residual chain, transporting it over meridians in her breast pocket. Flags danced drunkenly across the darkling field, unspooled their languid torsos listlessly into the limpid sky of possibility. I spent every quarter I palmed from my mother on yellow eggs in the store's prize machine. One had a plastic ring inside. I handed it to my impassive mother as she steered a cart overloaded with staples, detergent, Snapple. One heavy flag, unflappable, ginormous, bore down its shadow over her, then me. A consequence, a language, an infinity. So the next several poems, I'm going to keep thinking about this whole theme of being an immigrant in the United States. I feel very, um, I feel more than any other identity that I have. Like I come from one place. In fact, the Soviet Union, a country that doesn't exist, into another country, and I feel like I identify most with with being an immigrant than with anything else about myself, and always feel like I have a connection to someone who also was born in one place and ended up in another. American enterprise. I built this A-frame in Beacon I thought you might like. I put out all the stops. An 18-hole overture. Miniature balloons crowd the periphery of the mechanical residential gate with exaggerated spikes and protruding metal frame. Someone is always backing up the circular driveway. The future president removes his veil. It isn't me, for I am foreign born, although I have been naturalized and now hoist a flag fitfully. I don't interchange normally with people, but I do my best. When my number is called, I will proceed to the reception desk. I have had innumerable opportunities to sample Duc à l'Orange. I wonder what has happened to the time. There is no telling, only amnesia taken into evidence in the underfunded Hall of Science. It's almost time to watch someone dissect a cow's eye. For now, I bask between the weeping cherry and the common garden peony in the unseasonable summer. I don't talk about the, or the shh. Once my number is called for the collective good, after I give over my blood, I can leave at any time. And, you know, I, it's probably unsurprising based on what I'm saying that I spent a lot of time following the news of what was happening in the last, I don't know, 7 years or so on the border with Mexico, and watching images of people trying to cross this imaginary line we pretend exists between pieces of land that's actually not real, right, from one country into another. And, you know, as someone who was born in a country that restricted movement, you know, you had to apply for permission to leave the Soviet Union, right? The idea that anyone would restrict movement from one place to another is incredibly, you know, foreign to me. And I remember a particular image that I could not shake about 5 years ago of an American immigration officer spraying tear gas literally across the border at a mother, and she was holding a child, and she was like this from the tear gas. And I kept thinking, that child, that will always be a fact in that life of that child, that their mother was tear gassed as she was trying to move forward, right? Checkpoint. I crossed a border. I crossed a line. I crossed a threshold. I crossed the divide. I forded the strait between nowhere and wish. I shifted my body's weight in the direction of the sun. I was born in a well and began to crawl up toward a light in the muck. I believed I'd be well were I anywhere else, so I threw myself up. But nobody caught me as I dropped down. So I threw myself up every day for a life. The stone earth below me, my hard trampoline. A hiss in the throat telling me what I needed to live in a bleached neighborhood in the shade of high trees that bounced their helicopter fruit against the breeze. So I believed a promise on the side of the imagined line I wasn't on, like softer bread or bolder shade of sky, a promise like another me with a changed name and posture were I to cross the border, to cross the line, to cross the threshold, to cross the divide seared into the map in my head. So I spent my last coins on papers and gear, leaving my mother asleep in her chair as I rushed open-armed toward the door made of air that the gathering dust storm began to blow shut, my faith in nothing other than each breath, also invisible. I have two kids, and the oldest one is 9. And I have a boy who's 9, and I have a daughter who's 5. And when my son was very little, and he's a really sweet, you know, James can attest to this. James has met him. He's a very sweet boy. When he was very little, however, I thought of him as an incredibly violent baby, and I would hold him in my arms, and his hand would start going towards my face, and it would be 2 fingers, and they'd be getting closer and closer to my eyes, and I'd remember to flinch. Or I would hold him in my arms, and he just acquired his teeth, and they were very close to my neck, and then they were on my neck, and I would think about this often, like, will he stop, like, attacking me, right? He did stop, but this poem emerged as a consequence. The Empire of Light. The baby pulls my wrist into his mouth. The baby wants to eat my face. So does the dog, the one that I don't have, who lazes at the razor edge of vision, whose curved shadow when I'm still flat on my back, opening up like a gift the new morning clouds over me. The sister asks me to apologize for 1985 to 93. I screen all calls from the persistent bank. The baker calls. The baker wants her pie back. Even the fan, worrying the air from its perch on the ceiling, sucks breath from my lung. The future wants its diaper changed. I stroll it past the drooping wisteria to the Family Dollar, where I contemplate our next move. In the suburban zoo, we gawk at cages. We are surrounded by musical notes of bright weather. The panda turns its back on us like an unhappy god. I take the baby home. He'll live forever, I'm almost sure. He laughs like fire laughs, inexorable heat, blue flame unraveling. I have barely begun the day, I think toward evening. The baby presses at my collarbone. You know what makes us happy? The whole world. We're swaying to a prelude by Ravel. We're waving goodbye to the Empire of Light. Our destiny is red, purple, and black. Another poem involving the same son. By the time he was 3, I realized that even though it was already clear that he was very smart, it was very hard for him to articulate basic things. And sometimes when he would say a sentence, he would say it in the words in the wrong order, and it wasn't easy for him to communicate with the fluidity that maybe other children at his age did. Enunciation. The words I put in him he troubles with and over, shifting in reverse the syntax of, as though a poet troubling the line with malaprop, but not a poet yet. He's 3. He's lived less time than most of the anxieties I've nursed for him. Please don't roll over on the other boy, I whisper from the ball pit's burbling edge. 3 years after he opened into the fluorescent, enunciative light of the extraction room, his eyes, I case the boiling pit's perimeter for his lit smile and fail to to understand one thing he feels, this human foal, vortex of appetite, machine of noise, child who won't blow the softest sound into the penny whistle, this charming man who can't quite purse his lips to activate the bubble wand, tiny muscles refusing to hoist the necessary sails. The future promises countless encounters with useless specialists waving in his face wands, while tonight my son waddles out 3 hours after being put down, the muslin penguin pajamas sagging slack at the hip, to murmur to himself amid the assembled living room wreckage of miniature trains with trance-like clarity, his eyelids half glued. This is my whole life. This is my whole life and my world, too. We'll read one more poem from the book, and then one or two, we'll see, new poems, and then I'll close with something short from the book. By this poem, there are two children. Ordeal. The creatures throwing bran muffin at me from the back seat of the Volkswagen SUV stop talking to themselves and now take turns becoming dinosaurs, their happiest of games. They are a torture I talked myself into. And as I ferry them, my favorites, I notice with my tongue that I have managed in my sleep to lose the sliver of one side of a premolar. A portioning out, a judgment from the German Urteil, that which the gods dole out, one arduous deal. Most end up lucky never to have been marched barefoot like Kunigunda of Luxembourg over red-hot plowshares, nor forced to swallow feathers in dry bread, nor made to carry through a hissing crowd the planks of wood their fate will nail them to, nor waterboarded. Most of us are lucky, yet when we smile, we draw attention to the contours of the skull beneath uneasy skin, to the confusion polluting the eyes, startled like burghers in a painting by James Ensor, whose work makes clear what scared him in the tranquil afternoon, the dignified, deteriorating faces smiling into him as he traversed a bridge or saw a mirror and the skeleton inside. Myself, I prefer to retreat into the jellyfish dream factory of my open eyes as we traverse the span allotted, each hillside pedicured and tilled, a burst of starlings hurtling themselves in trapezoids at the clay sky above us, the brontosaurus, the triceratops, and me who loves them, if love is the right term for what the stand of hollow trees feels toward its greening canopy, for how night rain scatters itself over the eager topsoil, for the extent to which I'm able to luxuriate in light, inhaling steam, though I suspect I am succumbing gradually to an identity deficiency, an overpowering lack of sense as I continue serving until it's time to ascertain if the accused will sink in innocence or obstinately float, what's left of my life sentence with all of you beneath this wire and bird, amid the tangled shadows, root systems, a congeries of slate rooftops. Last March, I got to go to Denmark for about a week or so. Thank you, Bennington College, for letting me do that. And I went because I was very interested in the Bog People. Do you know who the Bog People are? Seamus Heaney was this wonderful poet who wrote a cycle of poems about the Bog People. Anybody know what I'm talking about at all? One person knows what I'm talking. Two people know what I'm talking about. But now all of you will. The Bog People were people living in Denmark a couple thousand years ago, whose bodies ended up in a peat bog. And the peat bog preserved the bodies incredibly well. Some of the people ended up in the peat bog clearly involuntarily because one of them, the Tollen man, has a noose around his neck, right? And you can go to Silkeborg, Denmark, and you can go look at the Tollen man and see like the striations of like on his foot, and he looks like he hasn't been in a bog for a couple thousand years, but he has. And you learn all this stuff. They know what kind of food he ate. They knew everything. You can learn so much from these very well-preserved bodies. And there are many locations all over Denmark when you can go to a museum and see a bog person. And If you go to the National Museum of Denmark in Copenhagen and you have children with you, they will give you a children's activity guide. And the children's activity guide has this absolutely terrifying drawing, right, of the skeletal remains of this woman found at a bog near Egtvet, a prehistoric girl known as the Egtvet girl. She's smiling, and it says Children's Activity Guide. And I wanted her to, like, I don't know, talk to us. So this is my best effort at it. A prehistoric girl. The strontium isotope value of my corded skirt. The glisten of bronze bracelets on my wrists. If you look closely, you will see the imprint my legs left behind on a cowhide. I understand your curiosity. I must have enjoyed the same blue that you do. Not yet having the concept of century, I took my time beside the flowering yarrow. Laughing, we passed the bucket of warm beer. I kept thinking as I ran from the bear about the chain of tracks my feet were planting across the snow of the surrendered field. Questions about my existence get urgent. I don't necessarily have any reasons. There was a tenderness of syllables my father nightly whispered into my sea of hair as I lay down that flared radiant across the sky in my brain, but I no longer possess the means to tell you their sound or the actual name of the strange girl I knew myself to be, the way it curled slyly out of my tongue. Alive, I kept poking around with a stick in the silver moss, imagining another world to pass into, expecting a golden portal of light to emerge between stones. Once you leave the museum, I'll hide in your blood. Perhaps you'll hear the rising tide of my voice in your head as you cross the wet meadow. Much of the bark wrappings have been destroyed. One elkskin foot wrap. And I think I'm actually going to close with another new poem. Artist statement. I listened to myself crawl. Rain softened my back. I was sure I had made a mistake again. That I knew better didn't matter. The morning light was an uncomfortable wool. The summer ocean was a net. I located myself in the distance between absence and presence. I listened to myself untangle. Cherries provided a brief interlude, not unlike joy, as did scratchy recordings of song. I preferred the strange beats that resembled a sky full of geese on their way somewhere velvet or felt. Sometimes I was as graceful dancing on my legs as a cricket on a wooden beam in a damp basement. Sometimes as sure of myself as a wolf prowling in the radioactive forest. Opening my mouth, I tried to impress upon everyone how much I knew, but the scratch of my voice was a kite string twisted around in the weather. I have spent my whole life trying to understand my whole life. I have spent my whole life arranging myself into words. I have made every flower in this garden by hand. I alone am responsible for the shush of the bulrush. It has proven, to say the least, challenging. I crack the pavement with my stubborn feet. I hold these teeth to be self-evident. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Will you take some questions? Sure. All right, cool. Join me up at the mic, and we'll repeat the question for the stream. Anyone want to ask Michael anything? I always love a Michael Dumanis poem because I'm going to learn about bog people and the lesser and greater bilbies, which sounds made up, right? But it isn't. Anyway, what do you want to know about bilbies or others? Logan? Yeah. So the question is about like the context that Michael gives before the poem, and then the poem itself and the relationship, I guess, between those things.
I mean,
Here's
okay.
the mic.
I want to say that's a really good question. Thank you for asking it. Um, I feel like if you think about any poem, right, what you really have is a blank piece of paper, and it's filled with words. And you don't know the writer, you don't know what caused the thing in front of you. And I think that the poem um, wants the words to be enough. I feel like in a reading, I try to create a kind I put clothes on the poem in some way. It's like I don't know a suit on. I don't know what kind of clothes I'm putting on the poem, exactly. But I feel like the poem wants to work on its own, and the way to read it, the way to receive it, is really as a kind of accumulation or progression of lines. Like it says a thing, then it says another thing. You don't need to know that I once went on a weird date with a puppeteer. Like you don't, like, and I think I offer that because like the poems don't exist real, like they exist in a vacuum, but they weren't formed in one, right? And but I feel like someone saying to you, "I'm fully posable, a leather and clay creature," right, with the capacity to waltz and do the twist, the opening lines of the book, um, doesn't presuppose that you know why those lines are written, but it wants you to encounter that idea. Suddenly a voice emerges out of the page and says, "Hi, like I'm fully posable," right? Well, you're fully posable too, right? At some level, right? And so it's really an invitation to inhabit that space jointly with this voice, right? And really, it's a creation of language, right? And I think that what I do is and what I do when I teach also is I encourage a kind of thinking in language, right? Where you write a line and you think, okay, that was just said, right, to a stranger. What is going to be said next to this stranger, right? Based on the words that I had just used, right? 25 years ago, I had this really interesting teacher, this poet, Rodney Jones, who would just say like crazy things in class. And one of the things he said in class, very offhandedly, like he wasn't trying to like make a statement. I think, he was just like workshopping somebody's poem. And he said, well, essentially, a poem is just an attempt to communicate across space and time between the interiority of one person and the interiority of another. And that really, like, I found that mind blowing. Like, this idea that I'm not trying to communicate to you as I, Michael, talking to you, James, right? But something inside me wants to communicate through this language to something inside someone I cannot know who is in a different place and in a different time, whether or not a day from now or 5 years from now or much longer, who knows, right? And so I'm really focused on creating like a language that expresses that interiority as opposed to the language that creates like the superficial like reality of the life. When I said that thing about autobiography being autobiographical, right? Whereas that poem Flag Day, which sounds completely autobiographical, I'm going to tell you a quick anecdote about it. I have two sisters born in the U.S. shortly after we emigrated, and one of them is an engineer, and she has read poems, and she reads my poems sometimes, but she's not like an avid reader or definitely not writer of poetry. But I sent her a copy of the magazine the poem was in, and she called me and she said, "Michael, you got everything exactly right. I'm amazed at how accurate this poem was, except we never drank Snapple. It's not true that we ever had Snapple at home. I didn't know what it was till college," my sister said. I said, "Well, you know what? I didn't know what Snapple was till college either. But I was thinking about this word, like I said, the mother's carrying staples in the shopping cart, and I thought staple kind of sounds like Snapple. It was after detergent. I thought, like, what is like kind of like abject here? What are the depressing things I can put in the shopping cart together?" And I thought detergent and Snapple. And in the middle of explaining this to her, I said, "I never was in a Flag Day parade. Right? I never did that." I said, "You're the one who played the flute. You're the one who loved Flag Day." And she said, "I did play the flute, but it's actually our other sister who was really into Flag Day for some reason." So the poem, so the poem becomes like kind of amalgam of all of these things. Whereas I used to say about autobiography, like not true at all, right? And then I look at it, I'm thinking, this is so much closer to like me and my interiority in a way. Right? Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Did you actually ever date an Abigail? I've never known you to arabesque after Abigail.
My very first crush ever in middle school. But it was one of those, when I say arguably arbitrary, I remember thinking like I am in 6th grade and I should like someone who? And I was in a Spanish classroom. I was looking around, and I found her. Like, maybe that was her name, and this is getting live streamed, so uh, maybe she's watching now. She was a wonderful person, but but I think the reality of, but like to me, what was real, like it was really funny to me in writing the poem. Oh, name that starts with A. I could totally do this, right? I could actually embed the name of the person into the text. But but to me, the thing that was important there that is arguably arbitrary, right? Or in the next line, am always arabesquing after. Like I thought that's the emotion I want to create. That's the, like, I want you to picture this voice. I'm not going to do it in arabesque right now, but I want you to imagine the speaker arabesquing after another person as a way of explaining their emotional interiority, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Any other questions that you'd like to ask? Do you still compose line by line? I remember when we knew each other in class in grad school, you composed line, but you couldn't go to the next line before you got the line.
Okay, James, what's incredible to me, and I've been around for a long time, is that I don't understand that anybody does it differently. Like I can't, like, it's locked into me. Like a poem, like I remember, like I was like, I don't know, I was in college and I had a professor, this poet Mark Strand, this amazing teacher and writer, and I really wanted to impress him. And I thought, I had an independent study with him, and I thought, and he was like totally sitting in judgment when I would come in with poems. And I thought, I have no idea what a good poem is. I just want to show him a good poem, but I don't know what that means. And I remember thinking, oh, but I think I know what a good line is, right? I have to stop thinking about it as a whole thing. I have to think about it molecularly, right? And I thought, I know what a good line is. It's that moment when someone says something and I listen and I think, oh, that's engaging, or, oh, the language did this thing there, right? And it makes me think of other things. And I thought, if I just write only good lines, how bad can the poem be, right? And, and I've always thought about a poem as either an accumulation or maybe more accurately a progression of lines where one line comes from the next and from the next. And I'd say I have to get a line to a space musically, to like a kind of a place musically, and in terms of its content, in terms of how the words are working with each other, that I'm happy enough with to create the next one, because it's all a kind of architecture, right? I do go back to them. I think what really happens is I'm not always happy with all my verbs the first time I write a poem, and then I go back and I swap the verbs out into verbs that are a little bit less on the nose, that are a little bit stranger maybe, but still kind of work, right? I often am interested to the thing that's adjacent to the thing that makes sense. Is that right? So that instead of saying the thing straight, I think, well, what could someone say that you'd still understand as this thing that's to the side? There's this line in a Bernadette Mayer poem where she says, "You're drinking your parents to the airport." And I think it's a malaprop of drinking instead of driving. I don't know what that means, I should say, but I love it. And I think it actually really creates a character who's drinking his parents to the airport.
How can you love something you don't know what it means?
That's a you don't mean that. How can you love something when you don't know what it means? Do you not love things that you don't understand? You used to love new pop songs.
Like Karma Chameleon, right? Like
I mean, but first of all,
the Beatles.
you know what the words mean. And I would say, and not, this is very much my own very particular approach, but I think that I really care about precision of meaning on the level of the line and the level of the sentence, right? I mean, a line like the example I gave you, you're drinking your parents to the airport, it's still precise. I can say that line is 1 degree away from you're driving your parents to the airport, but there's alcohol involved in some way. And obviously something is off in this relationship with the parents because you're drinking them, right? Or you need a drink as a result. So I understand what it means because I can talk around it, right? And there I think drinking is a kind of gesture, right, to stabilize the line. But I would say that I'm not always worried about, I think that sometimes people look at a poem as a whole, right? And they think, I don't understand it because they're approaching it as though it's a product that says one thing instead of approaching it as a kind of journey or conversation where it's, like if two people are talking and they talk about 7 different subjects and they talk about the afterlife and the baseball game and like who they're in love with and why they're sad and, the price of milk, right? And if they say all that in a conversation, you can follow that conversation. You can be engaged by aspects of that conversation. But what is it about? Well, it's about being alive, right? And I feel like I care about that, and I think a poem is a kind of journey where I say things over a period of time, right? And then I think that every line really needs a kind of precision. What I really want you to do is feel something or see something or taste something or experience it. Let's make the poem as cinematic as possible. But like, I'm not looking for. I don't know about message. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you know what it means, it sounds like when you don't know its message, right? I don't know that I have a message, but I think that I try to write lines that inherently have meaning. So it took me a really long time. Oh, sorry. Thank you. The question was, um, how do you compile poems into a book? How do you actually make decisions as you're writing towards a book? Like thinking like, having written these poems, what do I write next? Or how to order the book itself as it's, yes, that's a question. Um, I would say that I did not think about that in my first book. And so, people say something to you and they are trying to be very nice, right? And they think they're being very nice, but it like sticks in you and you can't shake it. And someone said to me about a book contest that I was runner up for, that the judge said that they preferred my poems to all of the entries, but they gave the prize to another writer for my first book because I wrote three like thirds of good books and put them together instead of writing one book of poems. And they worked as poems, but did they really work as a book? And I didn't really know what to do with that because I thought, well, they are my poems and they are tonally actually very related. But I always thought, like I always like had that in the back of my head, and I thought, well, next book I write is going to feel like a book, right? And it took me a long time, and I started every time I would write a poem, I would think this is a poem in the new book. Now that this poem exists, what other poems am I creating that are in dialogue with that poem, right? So, and I would also create a kind of deliberate binding glue for the poems. Here's the one weird thing I did. Before I had children, before I knew that I wasn't married, I didn't have children, and I didn't know that I ever would either would happen to me. I decided that anytime I was stuck in a poem, a child would wander through it, and that the poems would be held together by these children wandering in and out, right? And that started creating a kind of space that by the time I had children, it was very natural to write poems about real children that would join the children that already existed, in the book, holding them together. I knew that I wanted the word. Like I knew that when I came up with a title, right? I thought, oh, I want to call the book Creature. That means the poem Natural History has to be the first poem because the word creature is the last word of the first line, right? And then I want the word creature to appear at least one more time in the book. Like you heard it as like in the poem Ordeal, right, about the creatures throwing bran muffin at me, right? And then in organizing it, something I learned at the University of Houston from Cynthia McDonald, of all people. You probably learned this too, James. By osmosis. When you get to the last line of a poem, she would say, and you're ordering a book, that's the last line someone sees before the title or first line of the next poem. So you should try to create a kind of like marriage between like the last line of the poem and the title. She said title. I think first line makes more sense, frankly, but one or the other, right, of the next one. And then she would say this thing that doesn't really, I still don't really understand, but I said it for a while thinking I did. She would say, it's an accordion. your book is an accordion, and you open it up, and the pages open up like an accordion. And I started thinking about this like up and down pattern of the. I think it's a very weird thing to say repeatedly that the book is an accordion, but it really did something good for me. I thought so it has to like rise and it has to fall, and and it has to be expandable and it has to contract. I'm a very literal person, and I took that very directly. Like I have to write an accordion. So does that answer your question? Like really it's writing every poem into the poems that existed beforehand, and then I'll write a poem and I'll think like, is this the first poem of my book? Is this the last poem of my book? With every poem, like these are early poems towards a new book, but I have asked myself like, what if this book was called A Prehistoric Girl? What if it, like, where would that poem be in that book? Does that book then require other voices similar speaking? And my answer initially was yes. It's hard for me to plan ahead of time what I'm going to write the way it's actually really easy for other people to do so. But I thought, okay, so I need other people speaking from a kind of prehistory somewhere in some way in this book. I won't have a book until that happens necessarily.
I think prehistory is a good title, by the way, just for a book. Anyway, my 2 cents. How about we clap for our guest one more time? Thank you very much for working so hard. You may sit for a sec. Next, our next reading, or our next event is next Friday, April 5th at 4 p.m. Naomi Shiabnai will be here giving a generative workshop. She's the author or editor of 30 volumes of poetry. She's here keynoting the Kent County Poetry Festival, which will be taking place Friday, Saturday, mostly Saturday night. And then Sunday is the open mic down in Chestertown. And you all are please come read a poem by yourself or a favorite poet. It is a really, really cool event. And I hope I see you on Friday, Saturday, and or Sunday. I'm purchasing a lot of your time. Anyway, thank you all for coming out. Have a great rest of your night. Thank you for braving the rain. Yay! Good night. Oh, and Michael will be signing books for sale. They're $18. The broadside, if you'd like, is $22. Together, they are $30. There's a bundle. So if you'd like any of those things, they are available for you up there.